Hi, welcome back to the channel. Michelle, and today I'm going to be talking about how I adjust curriculum to meet my kids' needs. So if you're new here, I have an 11-year-old in 6th grade, 7-year-old doing 2nd, 3rd grade work, and a 4.5-year-old doing preschool level work. And this is mainly aimed at my 2 older children. So I wanted to talk about how I take curriculum, and if something isn't working, how I adjust it to meet their specific needs. Because I do think, especially on this platform, the normalcy is that if something isn't working in a curriculum, just completely change curriculum and try something different. I do think there are some really good benefits to figuring out why or what is not going exactly right in that curriculum and addressing those issues instead of trying to just go from curriculum to curriculum hoping that you find the reasoning behind it. So when I am having an issue with a curriculum or something is not jiving with my kids, there's 3 things I keep in mind. One is time. I don't make adjustments to my curriculum unless I've had a significant time with that curriculum and my child. And the nice thing is that we do a Sabbath schedule, so we always have 6, 7, sometimes 8 weeks on, and then a week off. So I always make my adjustments during that week off after we've had a solid 6, 7, 8 weeks with particular curriculum to see if, it was the curriculum itself, because sometimes just presenting new concepts can be difficult for children and they push back for those reasons. Sometimes it's not the curriculum at all. There's outside things going on or, growth spurts, hormonal influences. There's a lot of reasons why curriculum can't work or it's causing issues for you and really diving into it. But if you give up after a week and move on to something else, you're missing the opportunity to really dive deep and figure out what's going on that's not working and addressing the issue that's not working. Because I do think there are situations where, especially if you're curriculum jumping, you can have some gaps. And even with my oldest, she did public school K through 2nd grade, there are some gaps that I've only been able to find because I've dived deep into when we were having issues and really addressing the issues behind what was going on. So it does give you an opportunity to help fill those gaps. Number 2 is I always read the teacher guides and learn how to actually implement the curriculum. I know it is easy to pick and choose different things. I know it's easy to skip over the teacher guide, or make it your own. But I often hear people say that curriculum is a tool, which I agree, but you kind of need to understand how to use that tool. Like, you're not going to pick up a chainsaw without having a general idea of how that chainsaw works, right? Just like your curriculum, you need to have a solid idea of how it's supposed to be implemented and how it's supposed to be taught and the different, parts of it and how they relate to each other. Because yes, you can make it your own, but I do think having an understanding of how it's meant to be presented to your child is important, because you could easily miss things that were in the teacher guides that were already addressed. And the 3rd one is communication. Absolutely essential. Your child's ability to communicate that they're not understanding something's difficult, and this can be really hard with the younger ones. I'm not expecting my 7-year-old to be able to vocalize that this is what I don't understand, but I'm also preparing her and giving her that vocabulary that, okay, I need you to kind of help me pinpoint it, because we are not our kids' brains. We don't see everything, and sometimes, honestly, we're so close to the situation, it's hard for us to see those things. So with my 11-year-old especially, she came home for homeschool in 3rd grade. She's in 6th grade now. We have really worked on those communication skills about how I can best help her, how I can best meet her needs, not just relying on what you think or the assumptions you have about what's going on. They need to be able to vocalize that, and that's something you need to build up upon, not just expect them one day to, be able to tell you what's wrong, especially if you're just handing them a workbook or something independent and you're not necessarily very involved in it. They need to be able to communicate to you what's going on, but on the same point, communication is a two-way street. You need to be able to be checking the work they're doing. And it's very easy to become complacent in homeschooling, but honestly, you're going to catch a lot of the issues earlier if you are constantly involved in checking, even if it's independent. My oldest does Lightning Literature pretty independently. She does IEW pretty independently, but I am still there. I am still checking daily. I am still making sure things are getting done, that she's understanding things, and that if she's not, that open communication exists between us. So those are 3 things I kind of look for, but I want to give you specific examples, because I do think we can talk in theory about what to do, but when you have specific real life examples, it is helpful. And It just so happened in this past school, 6 weeks on, or I think we had 7 weeks on, 8 weeks on. So we're in 2 months into homeschooling now. And there were some things I noticed and I addressed. So I wanted to bring it up to you and show you what I did. So my 7-year-old is doing first language lessons, among a bunch of other things. She does core knowledge, 3rd grade. She does all about reading level 3. So this is just a component of her language arts. And there are some things I really enjoy about it. She's a child that definitely benefits from repetition. There's a lot of repetition in this curriculum. It's quick and easy, which again, I think does help with her ADHD brain, that it's just little snippets of it. But there are some things I've noticed that we are 3/4 of the way through that I don't like. And that is specifically the definitions given for parts of speech. And that could be, some bias on my part because I've done so much language arts with my 11-year-old that I feel like we've really gotten a really thorough understanding of language arts. And she's had core knowledge, which I think is good, but we've never really dove into grammar concepts prior to this. That's one of the reasons I brought first language lessons out, is I wanted to really hit on that more. And I do like, the natural introduction of, commas, address writing, things like that. But I don't think it does a good job describing the parts of speech, the definitions given that the children are supposed to memorize and be able to repeat. I don't think it is helpful for my particular daughter because it's not really explaining well how the words interact with each other. And I think especially for my 7-year-old who has ADHD, the more things she can grab hold to, the more that she's been previously exposed to, the better she is at remembering things. So her working memory is sometimes a struggle with ADHD. But the more things that the contextual knowledge, the more things she can remember or latch that onto, the better that information is going to stick. It's going to make that neural pathway stronger if it can already make a connection to something she's previously learned. So with that being said, quick switch I made out. The only thing we changed is I brought in Michael Clay Thompson. So, and we haven't, done the entire thing. There's just sections I am currently using right now, and we will slowly start going through it. I wanted to show you that I think Michael Clay Thompson does a much better job about explaining how words are related to each other and breaking it down. And for my child with ADHD, I think that is a much better introduction than just straight up definitions without much clarity. And I know there's a whole, school thought philosophy of, at certain ages they memorize things and then they use that knowledge later when they're in a different stage of development. Not for her. So I wanted to show this. So one of the first things you learn in Michael Clay Thompson's is the noun, verb, the 8 parts of speech, how they're related. So just seeing something as simple as this, that these things are interconnected and how they work with each other is going to be really beneficial for my child to be able to latch onto things she already knows and see the relationship between the words is going to help her understand it better, opposed to just memorizing the definition and being able to repeat it to me. That does not equate to understanding what it is. Memorization does not equate to understanding. So I have brought that in and kind of explained how words are together. And then when she's prompted in first language lessons for a definition, for example, adjective, I just swap out the definitions because I do think Michael Clay Thompson does a better job. So one of the big things with an adjective is it modifies a noun. So what does modify mean? It's another word for adjust, which I think is a much better definition for adjective than describing a noun. It modifies it. So if your noun is tree, modify that. How do you change your tree? It's tall, it's green. I think simple modifications like that have been really helpful. Same thing with a verb. I really did not like the lengthy, kind of confusing verb definition it gave in here. So in first language lessons, so we swapped it out from Michael Clay Thompson. The verb says that the noun or the pronoun does something or equals something, and kind of like an equation, which really helps my 7-year-old because she's very mathematically minded. So being able to see the relationship between words, especially highlighted like this for her brain, is really beneficial. Now, I do think there are parts of this that are still really beneficial, so I'm not going to get rid of it. I'm not going to completely drop this to start this, but I can supplement the areas that I think are weaker in this with something I've used prior with my oldest that I'm very familiar with, and bring in elements of that to really work towards her individual needs and how her brain works and her ability to grasp information, retain information, and retrieve information. So that was a quick example of how I just make minor adjustments to a curriculum. And again, I didn't buy anything new, I just used what I had, but I could, from previous teaching experience with my oldest, know that Michael Clay Thompson, I think, does a much thorough job with grammar than first language lessons. It's very on the surface level. So I needed to pull more for it, especially knowing my daughter and the research I've done about ADHD. I'm again able to realize how best to change that and fit with her brain better, using the resources I have, the knowledge I have, the reading I've done to adjust the curriculum to meet my child's individual needs. So now I want to talk about my oldest, my 11-year-old. So she has been doing Phonetic Zoo this past 7 weeks, 8 weeks. I'm just got into month 2, and it's been going well. And it went well in the first few lessons, and she was just flying through it, getting the word list. If you're unaware that you're given a word list, depending on what level you're on, A, B, C, you can test them to see what level they fit on. They're given a word list, and then they're getting a jingle, and it's done with headphones. They hear the jingle, words, write it all. So she was doing that, and it was working well for the first few weeks, first few lessons. In a couple days, she would have the list mastered. You have to get 3 correct in a row in order to move on to the next lesson, and it was going really well. But then we hit a lesson, and for some reason, she wasn't moving on, and I couldn't figure out what exactly was going on because it was going so well. Now, easily I could have been like, oh, I'm going to drop this and move to something else. No. So I'm going to deep dive and see what's going on. So first thing I did was observation. So when the first couple of weeks she was doing it, I did observe her doing it to make sure she was doing it the right way, because I want to make sure she had the system down of how to do everything so it could be more independent. I also had her do the audio without the headphones, so I was making sure she was actually listening to the audio and the corrections every day. She was following how it was written, exactly how it was supposed to be done. So I know it wasn't an issue on her part or the teaching instruction of the curriculum. That was not the issue. So step 2 is actually advice I was given in the comment section previously, which again, I really do appreciate when you guys give advice about how things best worked for you. Someone had commented when I talked about IAW Phonetic Zoo, that they had wished they had just read it out loud to their child opposed to the audio version of it. So step 2 is I started, instead of having her rely on the audio version, started doing the lesson with her every single day with my voice, because I do think she's going to listen to my voice a little bit better than the voice on the thing. It's much easier to drown out that voice, the audio on the IEW Phonetic Zoo, than it is to drown out mom's voice. So step 2 was I started doing the lessons with her every single day, which gave me the opportunity to see what wasn't clicking, what wasn't working here. So I went through the list, and there was about 4 words that she would consistently get wrong. And we were going over the E rule, so I before E except after C with exceptions. So we were going over that rule, and I noticed that when I would verbally give her the word, and she would write it down, but oftentimes she would write the word multiple times. And that clicked in my head that she's doing it from memory. She's recalling the information from memory and not necessarily focusing on the rule that we're learning, which, light bulb moment for me, makes a lot of sense for this particular child. Because one, in the public school system, again, she was in K through 2nd, they did spelling lists. So it makes sense that her brain's kind of already hardwired for, you're given a list, you get a test every Friday, you move on to a next list. The lists were no way related to one another. They were very random. So it makes sense that was kind of her default. 2, she reads a ton. She was a fluent reader in kindergarten chapter books. She's always reading. So it's very natural for her default to be relying on memory because she reads so much, she's exposed to so much vocabulary that she's just used to being able to see the word opposed to the rule. And then again, another light bulb moment is I had done, when she had come home for third and on, I had introduced all about spelling, and she flew through the first few levels of that. And I was like, okay, well, I guess she's got spelling done. She's a natural speller. And that goes through the rules and all the things, and, all that. But it dawned on me then that she wasn't probably really paying attention to the rules, but was able to spell the vast majority of the words in all of the first few levels of all about spelling from memory. That's why it was so easy for her, because she reads a ton, because that's her default. She has a very strong memory when it comes to that she wasn't necessarily paying attention to the rules, but was in fact just doing it from memory. And I only was able to catch this because Phonetic Zoo has a lot different words than you would normally see. So you can see some of those harder words. It's words that you really kind of have to know the spelling rule to be able to spell. So I was like, okay, so I get where we are. She is doing a lot of this from memory, not really paying attention to the lessons or the rules. So I was like, okay, so my next step is to every single day go over the rule and point out to her the words and how they relate to it, to really deep dive and explain. Again, not just memorization, but an understanding of why that rule is in that word. So we started doing that, and then I noticed a problem too. So, for example, we were doing the IE rule. We'll use that one because that's the one we struggled the most on before moving on to other lessons. We'll do a simple one like yield. She could spell yield, but I'll use it as an example. So when she was having trouble and couldn't remember it, I said, okay, well, let's look at our rule and let's phonetically spell it out. So yield, ya, e, o, d. So we're looking for the E sound in that word for our IE rule, right? So I realized that she doesn't phonetically spell. And again, this is something that I would only realize if I took the time to really troubleshoot this, and it makes sense. Because again, she went to public school for kindergarten. I did all about reading level 1. We got about halfway with her before she went off to kindergarten, and she was fluently reading, like I said before. So I never supplemented her reading education after she started kindergarten. Math, I did. When she would come home for summers, I would always supplement her math education for the public school, but never the reading, because I felt like she was already so far ahead of her peers that if I kept it up, that she would be so incredibly bored and so far ahead that it would be a disservice to her in the classroom. But not realizing that at the same time, the public school was not really teaching blends to the extent that All About Reading does. Like I said, my 7-year-old's in level 3 right now, about halfway through, and she has such a better foundational knowledge of blends and or letter combinations than my oldest ever did. So she has a much harder time remembering or even being taught certain blends. So for example, we were doing something with the TH sound. Oh, either. So again, either is one of those rule breakers, but I was trying to section out the words so she could better understand where these letters were. She couldn't tell me what the TH sound makes of. So I was like, that's the problem. Her default is memory, and if she can't remember it, doesn't have the skills to break it down. And again, not every word can be phonetically spelled. Totally understand that. But it is a good clue. And if you have a weaker foundation in that, it's harder. And that's one of the things that kind of bugs me about delayed learning. I know a lot of people say it's easier for them to catch up to their peers because they're older and they can take concepts more. Well, I'm telling you now, it's a lot harder to backtrack to that level of blends and things with an 11-year-old that fluently reads, she reads above grade level. So to have her go back and do blends and kind of give that foundational knowledge would be extremely hard at this point. So again, I only noticed this because of that. So being the case, what am I going to do now? I could switch curriculum and go to something more traditional based where it's list and memorization, something that she's done in the past that seems to work well with her memory. I could go back to teaching her blends, which again, I don't think that would be a good use of our time. I can completely forego teaching spelling rules because, spelling isn't a make or break subject, that your ability to spell doesn't necessarily equate with your intelligence. Here's how I landed on it. I am going to lean into her strengths, because I was watching a YouTube video talking about how we often focus on the weakest areas of our kids' homeschooling, where they're in their weakest areas, and not lean into their strengths. Is spelling going to make or break her? No, she actually spells pretty well straight from memory, just exposure. But does that mean she shouldn't learn the rules? No, because like I showed you here, when you get to more complicated words, you need to be able to have some accommodations to figure it out. And that's one of the things the YouTube video was talking about, that your kids can't master everything. They can't be great in everything. But in their weaker areas, you can help give them accommodations, show them tools of how to do something if it's a weaker area. So how I'm going to do this for her is I'm going to lean into her strengths, but still aid in her weakness. So her strength is memory. She has a fantastic memory. She's a great reader. She's exposed to a lot of literature. So I'm going to continue what I'm doing. Every day we'll go over the rule so she better understands it, me, not the audio, so she better understands the rule. I will point out with each word, obviously I'm not going to do each single word every day, but the main lesson will be this is why it works. And then we'll, kind of figure out what she knows from memory and move on from there. The things she does not know from memory, we're going to have to break down, and we're going to have to go over the rule and any phonetic issues that might be in there that she's unaware of. Because I do think it's important she learn the spelling rules. Is she going to remember every single spelling rule? No, that's not possible, I don't think. But does she need to have some of that knowledge to have as a backup in her brain for when she cannot remember how to spell it? Yes. So again, I'm not changing curriculum. I'm not adding any additional curriculum. I'm just adjusting the way I am teaching it to my child, which is a big part of homeschooling. I think not a lot of people realize that how you present it, the teaching resources you bring to your child really helps determine the direction it's going to go. That's why I'm not a big fan of switching curriculum. It's much easier to just switch the way you are approaching it or approaching your child than it is to continually buy new things and hope it works. And like I said, if you're not deep diving, sometimes you miss those gaps that exist because you're unaware. So that is how I am changing or restructuring or adjusting IEW Phonetic Zoo to better meet her needs. I'm leaning into her strengths, that she has a very good natural memory, but I'm also addressing the weakness of her phonetic spelling and her background information with phonetics, so that she has multiple tools to use when it comes to spelling, that her first default will of course always be by memory. That's just how her brain is wired, which is great, leaning into that. But I'm also giving her that other tool section, that this is what you could do to help you figure out how to spell the word as well. So those are how I've been adjusting my kids' curriculum in the past month and a half to better suit their needs. And I hope you find this helpful, that it is sometimes easier to go the route of deep diving than it is to go from curriculum to curriculum, because that's a lot. Introducing new curriculum, learning new curriculum, the frustration, the struggles. I would much rather get to the source of the problem and address whether that be supplementation or additional learning or different teaching strategy. I much rather address it that way and get to the root of the problem so we can move on to the next thing and address any gaps that may exist. So if you have any specific questions about anything I talked about, leave it in the comments below. If not, thank you for watching.